Sophia went home after work, thinking only about how to get to her cozy bed and order a pizza. It had been a hard day. Her boss was swamped with urgent reports, the coffee shop had mixed up her favorite latte with some kind of milk water, and the weather had decided to put on a capricious show with wind and rain. She quickened her step as the first drops began to hit the pavement. At the corner of the street stood an old house with peeling walls and broken windows. The house was a local legend. Some said it was home to rats the size of cats, others joked that it was haunted by spirits who hated renovations. But that day Sophia noticed something strange. Right on the doorstep of the house something glistened, despite the gray sky and the impending downpour. Curiosity overcame fatigue, and she stepped closer. There was a ring on the wet tile. It looked as if it had just fallen out of someone's pocket. Not a drop of dirt, not a scratch. It was a beautiful ring, finely engraved, with a small stone that shimmered with green light. "Wow," Sophia murmured, picking up the find. In her hands, the ring felt surprisingly warm, as if it were warming her palm. She looked around. Not a soul. The rain was getting heavier, and the wind was trying to knock her umbrella out of her hands. "Well, whose are you?" She asked the ring quietly and grinned at her own strange thought. It was silly to think that someone would come back for that ring. Maybe someone had dropped it by accident, but it looked so alien and mesmerizing at the same time that Sophia decided, "I'll take it and check the classifieds tomorrow. If no one's looking, I'll keep it." She quickly slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been created especially for her. When she got home, her first inclination was to throw off her wet clothes and turn the heater on full blast. The evening promised to be ordinary. Soap opera, dinner, early bedtime. But after only a few minutes, she noticed something strange. Usually the apartment greeted her with coziness and familiar sounds, the ticking of the wall clock and the faint noise of the refrigerator. But today, everything seemed too quiet. Even the clock had stopped at 7:30 for some reason. Are the batteries dead? Sophia wondered and gently touched the hands. The room felt colder, as if a draft had slipped through the hallway. Sophia turned around but saw nothing strange. She took a deep breath, turned on the television to get rid of the feeling of emptiness, and went to the kitchen to get tea. There was an old kettle on the stove that she had inherited from her grandmother, and it was its whistling that always reminded her of her childhood home. When the water boiled, she looked at her reflection in the window. And at that moment something inside her snapped. In the reflection she saw herself, but with a slight delay. Her reflection turned its head a little later than she did. Sophia bounced back, nearly knocking over the cup. Her heart raced as if someone had startled her in the middle of the night. Nerves. "It's okay," she said aloud to herself, trying to get her mind back on track. But there was already a nagging feeling inside that something had gone wrong. The next day started without incident, but the weirdness continued. Sophia noticed that the ring didn't want to come off. She pulled on it with effort, but it sat too tightly on her finger, as if it had shrunk around her hand. "You're stuck," she grinned, though worry was growing inside. She went to work and decided not to pay attention to the strange events. But something inside wouldn't let go. The feeling that someone was watching her every step, did not leave her for a minute. And that same evening, the bell rang at her door. "Who is it?" she asked, going to the door. There was no answer. Sophia looked out the peephole, no one. Just the darkness of the landing. "The children must be playing," she murmured, but her heart clenched again with an unpleasant foreboding. She walked back into the room and saw that the phone screen was lit up. There was a message on the screen. "Take off the ring before it's too late." Sophia stared at the screen as if a living ghost had appeared in front of her. The message was unsigned, and the sender's number consisted of only zeros. A joke. Someone's trying to scare me. But her voice sounded unsure. Sophia threw the phone on the couch and tried to distract herself. She turned on a soap opera and even fell asleep to it. But close to midnight, the phone rang again, loud, sharp, like a gunshot. This time Sophia didn't go to the door. She just sat on the couch and felt everything inside her clench with fear. Something was telling her, If she opened the door, her life would never be the same again. Sophia sat on the couch, wrapping her arms around her knees. The bell rang again, sharp, demanding. It seemed to pierce through her, shivering in the air like a warning. "What on earth is this?" she whispered, and looked back at the door as if she expected it to open on its own. The phone flashed again. A new message. "Can you hear them? Take off the ring." Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. "This is stupid," she said to herself. "Just someone deciding to play hard to get." But even logic couldn't drown out the panic that was rising in her chest. After a couple minutes, the ringing subsided. The apartment became quiet again, but this silence was not salvation, but a frightening, ominous silence. Sophia went to the door and quietly put her ear to it. No one. The landing was empty. "We should go to sleep. We should just go to sleep and forget about all of this," she convinced herself. Sophia woke up the next morning with a heavy head and a feeling that the night had brought no peace. The first thing she saw was the ring on her finger. The gold bezel glistened in the sun and the stone shimmered with a soft light. She tried to take it off again. She tugged, twisted, even soaped her finger, but the ring felt like it had grown into her skin. "What's wrong with you?" she said, angry at her own impotence. The phone on the bedside table vibrated. She picked it up and saw a message from her friend Anya. "Where are you? It's 9 in the morning, we're late." "Shit." Sophia exhaled and quickly ran to wash her face. Sophia was almost late for work, flying into the office a few minutes before she started. Anya was already waiting for her at her desk, tapping her finger on her mug. "Were you watching a soap opera until the night before?" Her friend raised her eyebrows. "Yeah. And it was much scarier than I expected," Sophia mumbled, still feeling defeated. Anya looked at her carefully. "You look like you've been up all night. Did something happen?" Sophia at first wanted to brush it off and just say it was a bad dream, but suddenly realized she needed to talk to someone. "I found the ring last night on the street. I put it on and then strange things started happening." Anya hummed and grinned. "Well, if this is the beginning of the cursed ring story, I need popcorn immediately." "Anya, I'm serious." Sophia stared at her friend. Anya's smile slowly faded. "Wait, do you really think this ring has anything to do with what's going on?" Sophia nodded. "The calls, the texts, the feeling that I'm being watched. Like someone wants to warn me or scare me." Anya shrugged, but concern flashed in her eyes. "Maybe one of our mutual friends decided to play a prank on you? I have friends who like to joke around, but this is over the top." Sophia showed a message from an unknown number. Anya frowned. "A number with only zeros. That's weird. Look, let's sit at my place after work and figure out who could have done this. Maybe we can even call customer service and have them check where the message came from." Sophia shrugged, feeling it was unlikely to do anything. The day passed relatively quietly. Sophia tried to focus on her work, but the feeling of unease wouldn't let her go. Every time her phone vibrated or her email buzzed, her heart began to pound faster. When the workday was over, Anya insisted Sophia go to her place. "Well, now let's figure out what your ghost ring is," Anya said as she poured tea. Sophia took off her jacket, sat down on the sofa and stretched out her hand with the ring in front of her. "It's beautiful," Anya remarked, looking at the jewelry. "But it looks antique. Are you sure it's even modern jewelry?" Sophia shook her head. "I don't know. It looked like it had just been left on the road, and yet it clearly wasn't new." Anya thought about it for a moment, then picked up her phone and started searching for information about vintage rings with similar designs. "Look, this is interesting." She showed the screen to Sophia. There was a section on the site about ancient jewelry used in rituals of protection and even revenge. The article said that such rings could bind the wearer to the fate of whoever had worn it before. Sophia grinned nervously. "You do realize this all sounds like the plot of a cheap horror movie, right?" Anya shrugged. "Yes, but sometimes such plots are written by life itself." Later that evening, Sophia returned home feeling slightly shaky. despite her friend's words and attempts to explain everything rationally. Deep down she knew that this ring was no simple piece of jewelry. As she closed the door, the room became too quiet again. It was 9 p.m. on the clock. She tossed her phone on the couch and went to the bathroom, determined to take a hot shower and distract herself. The warmth of the water relaxed her a little, but the strange feeling that she wasn't alone didn't go away. At one point she heard a faint sound, as if someone had walked across the floor outside the door. Sophia froze, her heart hammering in her chest like a drum. "It's the wind. It's probably just the wind," she whispered, though she realized there were no drafts in her apartment. She turned off the water and listened. Silence. Suddenly her gaze fell on the mirror, and a chill ran down her spine. An inscription was visible on the fogged glass, as if someone had written it with their finger. "Give back the ring." Sophia grabbed a towel, quickly wiped her face and ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut. She stood in the middle of the room breathing heavily as if she had run a marathon. "What's going on?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. But there was no answer. Just a cold silence that seemed like a harbinger of something terrible. Sophia stood in the middle of the room, feeling a chill run down her spine. Her gaze darted from the bathroom door to the reflection in the television, as if she expected something terrible to peek out from around the corner at any moment. The phone on the couch vibrated again. Sophia flinched, but still forced herself to pick it up. New message. Still the same number of zeros. "You have to give it back, or they'll take you away." "Who are they?" she shouted into the void, clutching the phone so tight her fingers turned white. There was no answer. Just silence, broken only by the faint noise of the refrigerator. Sophia paced the room, trying to focus and regain her composure. She turned on some music to drown out her thoughts and looked at the ring. Its surface was shimmering green, but now it seemed ominous. "Should I really take it off?" she whispered, but as soon as she tried to pull on the ring again, her finger ached. It felt as if her skin was stuck to the metal. Sophia felt light-headed and sank heavily onto the couch. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. Where exactly had she found the ring? A memory flashed before her eyes. An old house with peeling paint, broken windows and weedy steps. It was there that she'd seen the shiny bezel on the stones near the porch. In the morning, Sophia was determined to return to that house. She felt that answers were waiting for her right there. Anya, seeing her in the morning, immediately noticed the dark circles under her friend's eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked warily. Sophia shook her head negatively. "That ring. It's definitely not a simple ring. There's something wrong, Anya. Today I'll go to the house where I found it." Anya rounded her eyes. "Are you serious? Are you sure that's a good idea?" Sophia sighed. "I just don't have any other choice. If I don't go there, I'll go crazy." Anya thought for a moment and then said decisively, "Then I'm coming with you." Sophia wanted to object, but her friend raised her hand. "Don't even think about changing my mind. You're not going there alone." Later that evening, the two of them stood at the gate of the old house. It looked even more sinister than Sophia remembered. The steps were covered in dust and fall leaves, and the inside of the house was absolutely silent. "God, this place is like something out of a horror movie," Anya muttered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Did you really find the ring here?" Sophia nodded and pointed to the corner of the porch. It was lying right there. Anya leaned over the spot Sophia had shown and noticed a glint between the stones. "Wait, there's something else here." Anya carefully pulled out a small metal object, an old tarnished locket. They looked at each other with the realization that the find only added to the mystery. Sophia opened the locket and saw an old black and white photograph of a young woman with a pensive and slightly sad look on her face. Is that her?" Anya asked quietly. Sophia nodded slowly. "Think so." Engraved on the back of the locket were the words, "I will stay here forever." Anya sighed. "Look, can we stop playing detective already? It looks like someone wants us out of here as soon as possible." But Sophia shook her head. "No, we have to find out who she is. Back home, they sat down at their laptop and started searching old photos and archives for houses in the neighborhood. After a while, they found a note from an old newspaper. A young woman named Maria disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her last known whereabouts was her parents' house, which was later abandoned. It is said that she wore a ring that was passed down the female line in the family. Sophia read those lines, and a chill ran down her skin. "So the ring belonged to Maria," she whispered. "And she disappeared." Anya looked at her friend anxiously. "It doesn't seem like a coincidence anymore, Saf." At that moment the phone vibrated again. Another message from a number of zeros. "You're on the right track. But you have to give the ring back." Sophia exhaled slowly and said, "We have to go back to this house and finish everything." Anya frowned. "Do you want to leave the ring there?" "Yes," Sophia nodded. "I feel like it's the only way to get rid of all this." The next evening they walked back to the house again. The time was nearing midnight. The air was cold and penetrating. The moon illuminated the old steps with a faint silver light. Sophia took out the ring and locket and placed them on the very spot where she had found the jewelry. "That's it. It's here now," she said, trying to believe it would finally be over. But as she straightened up, a strange whispering sound came from behind them. They turned around but saw no one. "Did you hear that?" Anya asked in a trembling voice. Sophia nodded, squeezing her friend's hand. Suddenly a light flickered before them, thin, flickering like a candle flame. In that light appeared the ghostly silhouette of the woman in the photograph. She stood motionless, her eyes full of pain and loneliness. Sophia took a step forward and whispered, "Is this yours?" Maria's figure nodded and disappeared along with the flickering light. Everything went quiet. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, expecting something terrible, but nothing happened. Only the night wind rustled through the trees. "Is that it?" Anya exhaled, not believing her eyes. Sophia smiled slowly. "Think so." They turned and walked away, leaving behind the old house and its secrets. Sophia no longer felt heavy on her heart. She had taken back something that wasn't supposed to be hers and found a long-awaited peace of mind. But even as they stepped out onto the lighted street, Sophia knew one thing. This night would stay with her forever. For several days after the ring was returned, Sophia felt relieved. The disturbing phone calls had stopped. No more strange messages had come in. For the first time in days, she was able to get a decent night's sleep. Felt like it was really over. But the sense of calm didn't last long. One evening, as Sophia was preparing dinner, a strange noise outside the window caught her attention. It was dark in the apartment except for the kitchen light, so she clearly saw something flicker behind the glass. "Well, no," she whispered, dropping the ladle on the table and heading for the window. She cautiously looked out into the street, and her heart sank. On the opposite side of the street stood a man. A tall man in a long coat, completely motionless. His face was hidden by a hood, but his posture gave away that he was looking directly at her window. "Are you kidding me?" Sophia exhaled, stepping back. She grabbed her phone and dialed Anya's number. The beeps went on endlessly, but her friend never answered. At that time, the silhouette slowly turned around and disappeared around the corner. Sophia felt her pulse throbbing in her temples. She closed the window and draped it shut. Maybe it was just a passerby, she tried to convince herself. Maybe someone was just looking for shelter from the rain. But the fear was back, and it didn't feel like her usual anxiety. The next day, Sophia told Anya about the strange figure outside the window. "Do you think it had something to do with the ring?" Anya asked, shaking her head. "I don't know, but it seems too much like a continuation of that story." Anya thought for a moment. "Look, if the ring is still there and you've returned it, then maybe it's something else. Or someone else." Sophia fell silent and took a sip of coffee. Her mind tried to find a rational explanation, but her intuition whispered otherwise. This story wasn't over. That night something strange happened again. Sophia woke up in the middle of the night feeling very cold in the room. It was as if the air was soaked with frost. Her breath was turning into a cloud of vapor. She looked around and saw her phone lit up with an incoming message. Her heart sank when she read it. "You got the ring back, but that's just the beginning." Sophia sat up abruptly on the bed. The screen went out, but a sense of panic gripped her. She walked to the door and peered into the hallway. Seemed like something was moving in the darkness. "No. No, it's just me," she whispered, but froze when she heard a faint whisper. The whisper was barely audible, but it sounded distinct. "Find the truth." Her skin was covered in goosebumps. She turned on the light, but there was no one in the room. "This can't go on like this. I have to figure out what's going on," she said firmly. The next day Sophia went to the city archives. She knew that somewhere in those old books and newspapers the answers were hidden. The building was semi-dark and the smell of dust and old paper filled the air. She was greeted by the archivist, an older woman with glasses who looked like she knew all the secrets of the place herself. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "I need to know about a family that lived in a house on the outskirts." "It's about a woman named Maria," Sophia said, her voice trembling. The archivist looked at her carefully and frowned slightly. "Are you talking about Maria Sokolovskaya?" "Yes. I think that's her," Sophia nodded. "That story hasn't been forgotten here. People still whisper about her. Rumor has it that her spirit never left this town," the woman said, opening one of the old albums. An old newspaper clipping appeared before Sophia's eyes. A black and white photo showed the very same house and a small note beneath it. "Maria Sokolovskaya's disappearance remains unsolved. On the night of her disappearance, neighbors heard screams, but no signs of a struggle were found." Sophia ran her finger across the faded page, feeling a lump come up to her throat. Had she disappeared? Sophia asked quietly. The archivist nodded. "Yes. But before that, there had been a series of strange events in the city. People said that Maria was looking for something, and that she herself was scared." "Scared of what?" The woman shrugged. "No one knows that. Some claim that she found something that didn't belong to her, and that it ruined her." Sophia closed the album and thanked the archivist. On her way out, she felt the pieces of this sinister puzzle begin to come together in her hands. But there was still a key piece missing from the complete picture. When Sophia returned home, she was greeted by a wary silence. She walked into the room, threw her jacket on a chair, and looked at her phone. A new incoming call. An unfamiliar number. She picked up the phone and spoke cautiously. "Hello." A man's voice answered. "You're closer to the truth than you think." "Who are you?" she blurted out, struggling to suppress a shiver. "It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you must finish what you started." The connection went dead. Sophia stood with the phone in her hands, not knowing what to do next. Her legs gave out and she sat down on the couch. The same question echoed in her head. What do they want from me? She closed her eyes and saw the face of the woman in the picture again. It was just as sad and pleading. Sophia realized. The story of Maria and her ring was more than just a legend. It's not a completed chapter of the past that needs its own denouement. And no matter what happened next, she knew one thing. She would have to face the real truth, one that could change her entire view of reality. Sophia sat on the couch, staring at her phone with a blank screen, but the voice of the mysterious stranger still echoed in her head. "You're closer to the truth than you think." The words echoed in her mind, evoking an icy dread and some strange premonition that she was indeed close to a clue, but the ending to this story would be far from happy. She rose abruptly from the couch and made an impulsive decision. Stop being afraid. I have to find out everything to the end. In the morning Sophia called Anya and asked to meet. Her friend immediately sensed that the matter was serious and agreed without any further questions. They met in a small cafe on the corner, where the smell of fresh pastries and coffee, but Sophia barely smelled this cozy smell. Her thoughts were immersed in chaos. "What's wrong? You look like you haven't slept all night," Anya asked anxiously. Sophia nodded and put the locket they had found at the old house on the table. "Anya, some man called me. He said I was close to the truth, but didn't explain anything more. Her friend frowned and carefully took the locket in her hands. Are you sure you're not seeing this because of stress? Saf, you've been practically stressed out for days now. Maybe you should just rest. Sophia shook her head. No, it's all real. I went to the archives and found information about Maria Sokolovskaya. She didn't just disappear on. They've been looking for her for months, but they never found her. And before she disappeared, she was obviously afraid of something. And I think that ring, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It meant something to her. Anya bit her lip and looked at her friend thoughtfully. Okay, if it's true, what do we do next? Sophia ran her hand over her face and said quietly, we need to find those who lived in this house or at least knew her. Someone must have seen something or remembered something. Anya nodded doubtfully. It won't be easy. It's been too long. But deep down they both realized there was no other way out. That same day they went to the outskirts of the city to talk to the neighbors of the Sokolovskys' house. The neighborhood looked abandoned and dilapidated, but a few houses were still inhabited. The first door they knocked on was that of an elderly man with kind but tired eyes. What can I do for you? He asked, squinting and adjusting his glasses. Hello, my name is Sophia and this is my friend Anya. We want to know about the Sokolovsky family. About their daughter Maria, Sophia said, trying to sound calm. The man's face changed. The smile disappeared and his gaze became tense. Maria. Yes, I remember her, he said quietly, as if the memories were too heavy. She was a special girl, kind but quiet. Always looked at the world as if she knew something we didn't. What happened to her? Why did she disappear? Anya asked. The man lowered his eyes. Some believe she got involved with something not of our world. Sophia froze, feeling everything inside clench. What do you mean by that? She asked quietly. I remember her wearing that ring in the last weeks before she disappeared. He pointed to a picture of the ring on Sophia's phone. She said she'd found it by accident. But then strange things started happening. It was like she was being haunted by shadows. She said she heard whispers at night. And a few days after these conversations, she was gone. Sophia and Anya looked at each other, a shadow of horror running across their faces. Do you think the ring is connected to her disappearance? Sophia asked, barely containing the tremor in her voice. The man sighed heavily. I don't know, girl. But I advise you to stay away from all this. Maria was the first but far from the only one. After this conversation, they returned to Sophia's apartment, feeling as if they had learned a secret they weren't supposed to know. Well, Saf. Anya sighed, struggling to take off her coat. We've learned all we can. What now? Sophia sank down on the couch and rested her head on her hands. I don't think it's just a ring. Something more. Maybe it's connected to the last moment of her life. We have to find out what happened that night. Anya opened her mouth to object, but at that moment the lights in the apartment flickered, then abruptly went out. The girls froze. Did you pay the electricity bill? Anya tried to joke, but her voice trembled. Sophia got up to check the switch, but before she could reach the door, the air around her was filled with cold. And in that icy silence came a familiar whisper. You came too close to the truth. Sophia froze in place. The silhouette of a woman in a long dress slowly loomed in the depths of the corridor. Her face was blurred by shadows, but her gaze glowed with sad agony. Anya screamed and rushed for the exit, but the door slammed shut on its own. What is it? Screamed her friend, holding the doorknob like a lifeline. Sophia stood motionless, staring at the ghost. She realized, it was Maria. Do you want us to find out what happened? Sophia whispered. The figure nodded and then disappeared, leaving behind a slight puff of air and a cold trail on the floor. The light flickered and returned. Everything was back to normal, but the girls' hearts were filled with fear and the distinct realization that they were on the verge of something terrible. Saf, we can't do this alone, Anya exhaled, her hands trembling as she dialed the number of a psychic she knew. Sophia nodded, but inside she knew that no matter what the psychic said or what they did, the truth was too close. And with every step, that truth could become their destiny. A psychic named Veronica arrived at their house an hour after Anya's call. She was a woman in her 40s, with long dark hair and a penetrating gaze in which there was not a single drop of skepticism. She entered the apartment with the confidence of someone who knew why she had been called and what was to be seen. Veronica looked around the room, held her gaze on Sophia, and said quietly, "There is something here. And it's not just a trace of the past." Anya pressed her lips together and whispered, "We're not crazy, are we?" Veronica nodded gravely. "No, you're not crazy. I sensed it on the phone." Sophia looked at her hopefully. "Can you explain what's going on?" The psychic walked deep into the apartment and stopped in the hallway, the same place where they had recently seen Maria's silhouette. She touched the wall with the palm of her hand, as if listening to something. After a few seconds, she whispered, "A trace of tragedy has been left here. Her fear, her pain. Still here." "Are you talking about Maria?" Sophia clarified. Veronica slowly turned around and nodded. "Yes. It's her presence. She's bound to that ring. And you've put it on and connected yourself to her story." Anya bit her lip and shifted her gaze to her friend. "So this is all because she found that ring?" "Yes," Veronica confirmed. "But the problem is that Maria is not the only one connected to this ring. It's like a door. It opened something that wasn't supposed to open." Sophia felt the fear building inside her again. "What do you mean it's not just Maria?" The psychic sighed heavily. "What you saw is not only the spirit of the dead woman. There is something darker. That is using her image to hold you." It was as if the room was filled with cold. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself as if that could protect her from the invisible evil. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. Veronica looked at her seriously. "You have to go back to where it all began. And not alone. We'll perform a ritual to break the bond. But be prepared. What's attached to you won't just let go." Anya wanted to say something, but instead she squeezed Sophia's hand as if to say, "I'm with you." That evening the three of them drove to the old house. It was a particularly dark night, and the dim light of the street lamps seemed even more lifeless. The house was still as gloomy as ever, surrounded by the shadows of the trees and a silence that pressed on their ears. Veronica pulled candles, an old leather pouch of herbs, and a silver ring from her bag. "This is a protective amulet. It will help keep you temporarily safe, but the important thing is to stay focused." Sophia and Anya exchanged glances and nodded. They didn't know what awaited them, but they realized that there was no turning back. The psychic began to lay out the candles in a circle in front of the entrance to the house. When the circle was complete, she lit each candle and whispered something in an ancient language. The flames trembled but did not go out, though the wind increased. "Step inside the circle," Veronica said. When the three of them were inside the circle, Veronica continued, "Concentrate on what you want to release. Close your eyes and repeat after me. I don't belong to you. I'm giving yours back so you can find peace." Sophia closed her eyes, clenched her hands into fists and began to repeat after the psychic. But after a few seconds, she felt the air around her become thick and heavy. Her chest squeezed so tightly that it was almost impossible to breathe. Somewhere on the edge of the circle, a silhouette flickered. It was Maria again, the same woman from the pictures and visions. Her image was both beautiful and frightening. Her eyes glowed with sadness and anger. Sophia took a step forward and whispered, "Do you want the ring to stay here?" Maria nodded slowly, but suddenly her face contorted in pain. Behind her, a second silhouette manifested, dark, faceless, resembling a blob of thick smoke. Veronica sharply shouted, "Don't look into his eyes." But it was too late. Sophia felt her gaze being drawn into the black void. Scraps of other people's memories flashed through her mind. Screaming, crying, pain, and someone who whispered, "It's not over." Anya grabbed her arm and shouted, "Sophia, Look at me. Sophia blinked and snapped out of this hypnotic stupor. Veronica quickly pulled out a silver ring and squeezed it in her hand. It shone with a bright light, and then the circle of candles burst into flames. The dark figure faltered and disappeared as if blown away by a strong wind. Only Maria remained. Her face softened and she whispered softly, "Thank you." And before she disappeared completely, she stretched her hand forward as if saying goodbye. When it was over, Sophia fell to her knees, breathing heavily. Is that it?" Anya asked, struggling to hold back tears. Veronica nodded, but her face was serious. "We broke the connection. But remember, these things leave traces." Sophia looked at her hands. The ring was gone. It had disappeared along with the image of Maria. She rose slowly and felt a lightness fill her body. "We made it," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. Anya hugged her, and they stood like that for a few minutes, feeling that the horror story was finally over. But as they stepped outside the grounds of the house, Sophia turned around and saw that the house no longer looked so ominous. It seemed empty and abandoned, as if there was nothing else left in it. "You are truly free now, Maria," Sophia said and turned to leave the place for good. Several days had passed since the events at the old house, but the calm that Sophia had been looking forward to was fleeting. At first glance, everything seemed to be back to normal. The calls had stopped, the dreams were no longer a nightmare, and life seemed to be getting better. But somewhere deep inside, there was still a feeling of incompleteness. Sophia noticed that at times her gaze involuntarily stopped on empty things: old mirrors, dark windows, or reflections in the water. It was as if she was looking for someone who was no longer around. One morning she woke up to a strange sound. It was something between a clatter and a rustle. She opened her eyes and immediately noticed that the door to her room was ajar, even though she always closed it at night. "Anya, are you here?" Sophia called out quietly, remembering that Anya could sometimes come in without calling, especially after everything that had happened. There was no response. Sophia got out of bed, walked down the hallway and peeked into the kitchen. It was empty. Her attention was caught by something on the table. There was a small white piece of paper lying there. Sophia frowned and walked closer. It was a small piece of old faded paper with ink written on it. "They're still here." Sophia's breath caught. 1,000 thoughts flashed through her mind. Where did this come from? Who left it? And who are they? At the same instant her phone rang. Sophia flinched but quickly picked up the phone, hoping it was Anya. "Hello, Sophia. It's me, Anya. Listen, where are you?" Her friend's voice sounded worried. "At home." "What happened?" Anya sighed heavily. "I had a strange dream. About Maria and her house. Saw you there. And in that dream you were holding the ring again." Sophia felt a chill run through her body. "Anya, this can't be a coincidence. Someone or something is trying to warn us. Do you think it has something to do with that inscription?" My friend asked me. "Yes, I found it on my desk this morning. Someone left me this message. Do you want me to come over?" Anya suggested it. Sophia nodded, even though she knew her friend couldn't see her. "Yes, let's meet at my place." Half an hour later Anya was already sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, and Sophia tried to tell everything calmly, although her voice was constantly shaking. "Are you sure that this message was left by someone and not just a figment of your imagination?" Anya asked cautiously. "Anya, I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't imagine such a thing. Besides, the paper is old, like it's decades old." Her friend tapped her fingers on the cup thoughtfully. "Maybe we should go to the archives again. Maybe we missed something." Sophia was silent for a long time, then nodded. "You're right. We should go back and see if there are any other records about Maria and her family." When they entered the archive building again, the smell of old books and paper enveloped them like a blanket from the past. The archivist, the same elderly woman, greeted them with surprise. "Oh, you are here again. What are you looking for this time?" Sophia came closer and placed the paper she had found on the table. "This was at my house," she said. "I think it might be related to Maria or her family." The archivist stared at the paper for a long moment, then said quietly, "This handwriting. I think I've seen it before. Wait here." The woman went deep into the archives, and for a few minutes the girls sat in tense silence. When the archivist returned, she was holding a thick folder. It was a record of the letters that had been left behind after Maria's disappearance. "Most of them are fragments, but they're better preserved than I thought." Sophia opened the folder and saw several yellowed pages. On one of them was text written in the same handwriting as on the note. "They're always watching me. I can't hide anymore." Anya and Sophia exchanged worried glances. "That means Maria was trying to tell something." "But no one heard her," Anya whispered. The archivist sighed heavily and added, "Many people said at the time that she tried to escape but was caught. But there is another version. That she herself let something into her life and it was the cause of her death." "Let it in," Sophia interjected. The woman nodded. "Sometimes the darkest forces don't come on their own. They are invited." By the time they left the archive, the sun was setting and the streetlights were coming on. Sophia walked in silence, staring straight ahead, as if immersed in her own thoughts. "And now what?" Anya asked, catching up with her friend. "If Maria let something in, it means that now it can be connected not only to her but to us as well. We're missing something. Do you think we need to go back there again?" Anya asked fearfully. Sophia stopped and nodded slowly. "Yes. And this time we have to find out everything to the end." Anya sighed heavily. "Okay. But if I die in this house, I will haunt you even in the other world." Sophia grinned despite her fear. "Ill." When they approached the old house again, the night had already completely engulfed the city. Moonlight illuminated its shriveled walls and cracked windows, making it even more frightening. This time they went inside together. The silence of the house seemed alive. Their every movement echoed. "Where haven't we looked yet?" Anya whispered. Sophia looked around and nodded toward the stairs. "Upstairs. We didn't go up to the second floor." Anya sighed, as if gathering her courage, and began to climb up following Sophia. With each creak of the old steps, their fear grew. On the second floor was a room with a closed door. Sophia tentatively pulled the handle and the door opened with a heavy creak. The room was semi-dark, but there was something glistening on the floor among the dust. Sophia bent down and picked up the object. It was a small key ring with the initials on it. "This belonged to Maria," she whispered. At that moment they heard footsteps behind them. They turned around and saw a shadow. But this time it wasn't Maria's ghost. It was someone else. And his presence was far more frightening. Sophia's eyes widened in horror as the shadow slowly approached them. "Run!" Anya shouted and grabbed her friend's hand. They took off and ran down the stairs, hearing the thudding sound of footsteps behind them, as if an invisible force was chasing them. When they ran out into the street and stopped, breathing heavily, the house behind them was silent again, as if nothing had happened. "It wasn't Maria," Sophia whispered, catching her breath. Anya nodded, gulping air with her mouth. "Yes, and I don't want to know who it was." But both knew, whatever it wasn't gone yet. And they weren't done with the story yet. Sophia and Anya stood in the street in front of the old house, unable to catch their breath. Their faces were pale and their hearts were still pounding frantically in their chests. The cold night air burned their lungs, but none of them could gather their thoughts. "It's not Maria's ghost," Sophia repeated in a broken voice, staring at the dark windows of the house, as if expecting something else to be there. "It's something else. And it's dangerous." Anya ran her hand over her face, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Sophia, will you stop? We've already done everything we can. This place. It lives by its own rules. We can't beat it." Sophia turned to her friend and shook her head. "No one. We're just getting close to figuring it out. If we leave now, it won't end. It will follow us." Anya lowered her gaze and whispered, "I don't want you to get hurt." Sophia gently put her arm around her friend. "No. But if we stop now, we will never live peacefully." Anya sighed and looked at Sophia with doom. Okay, what's next? Sophia took a deep breath and answered. We need to find who this other is. The next morning, Sophia and Anya decided to talk to Veronica. If anyone could know what was behind Maria's image, it was the psychic. Veronica met them in her apartment, filled with candles, herbs, and strange amulets. A bowl of herbal smoke was burning on the table, and the smell of sage was in the air. I had a feeling you'd be back, Veronica said, inviting them to sit down. Sophia lowered herself into the chair and began to speak without preamble. We've been to Maria's house. We saw her. But then something else, a dark something, chased after us. Veronica frowned and reached for the amulet around her neck. It wasn't Maria's spirit. She's connected to this place, but her story isn't so simple. There is another spirit, or rather an entity. Anya clenched her fists. What kind of entity is this? Veronica took a deep breath. It's a guardian. His job is to hold back those who get too close to the truth. It is connected to ancient rites that were performed on this land long before there was a home. Maria knew about it but could not escape. Sophia wrapped her arms around her head. So whoever left the ring knew it could be a trap. Veronica nodded. Most likely, yes. And now you've become part of the story. Anya looked at her friend anxiously. Veronica, is there any way to stop this guardian? The psychic nodded slowly. There is only one way. To finish what was started by Maria. Recognize her last request and fulfill it. Sophia frowned. But we don't even know what she wanted. We've only seen her pain and fear. Veronica took a small basin of black salt and squeezed it in the palm of her hand. To find out her truth, you must return to the house. But this time we must perform a ritual to summon her soul. Only then will she be able to tell you everything you need to know. Anya looked anxiously at Sophia. Are you sure you want to go back there again? Sophia sighed and replied. Have to. That same evening they stood in front of the house again. Now there were 3 of them. Veronica set candles around the threshold and poured black salt in a circle to protect herself and the girls from dark forces. When the ritual begins, you must be extremely focused. Do not be distracted by sounds or movements. These may be the guards' deceptions. The main thing is to listen only to Maria's voice, Veronica warned, lighting the last candle. Sophia and Anya nodded and stood inside the circle. The air became dense, like before a thunderstorm. Veronica raised her hands and began to recite ancient words that sounded like whispers of time. The flames of the candles flickered and rose upward as if touched by an invisible wind. After a few moments, a faint glowing silhouette appeared in front of them. 'Twas Maria. Her face was calm but sad. Is there something you want to tell us? Sophia asked quietly. Maria nodded and held out her hand. The same ring appeared again in her palm. You must return it to where it was created, Maria whispered. Sophia frowned. But where is that place? Maria's figure slowly disappeared, but her last words remained in the air. Where it all began. When the ritual was complete, Veronica extinguished the candles and sank to the floor, wiping sweat from her forehead. She showed you the way, she said, breathing heavily. Anya frowned. But where is it? What do you mean, where it all started? Sophia thought about it, remembering every story, every line from the archives. And suddenly it hit her. That old cemetery outside the city. Do you remember, Anya? One of the archival records said that Maria's house was built next to the churchlands. Anya nodded slowly. Yes, and there was a burial ground there even before it was built. Do you think the ring is connected to that place? Sophia looked up and answered confidently. I don't think so. No. The 3 of them went to an old cemetery outside of town. It was surrounded by dense forest, and its wrought iron gates creaked in the wind. The moon shone in the distance, illuminating broken headstones and abandoned graves. Sophia walked to the center cross where the altar once stood and raised the ring above her head. This is where you found peace, Mary. And this is where it must end, she whispered and placed the ring on the ground in front of the cross. At that moment there was a strong gust of wind. The candles went out and the moon disappeared behind the clouds. Everything around was plunged into darkness. But then the wind subsided, and suddenly a light flashed over the ring. A quiet, warm light, like a candle flame in total darkness. And Maria's voice whispered, "Thank you." The light went out, leaving only the stars in the sky. Sophia stood in silence and felt the weight lifted from her soul. Anya exhaled and smiled through her tears. "I guess it's truly over now." Sophia nodded and looked up into the sky. "Yes, she's free now. And so are we." They turned and walked away, leaving behind a place that had finally found peace. But the story would stay with them forever, as a reminder that truth must be found, even if it is hidden in darkness. Several weeks passed after Sophia returned the ring to the old cemetery. Everything around her was finally back to normal. She no longer saw ghosts, heard strange rustles, and her phone no longer flashed with cryptic messages. Home was once again a place where she felt safe. But most importantly, she had regained her peace of mind. Anya had supported her all this time, helping her to regain her confidence and zest for life. They met more often, walked around the city, talked about silly things and even laughed at what had once seemed something incredible and frightening. But in the back of her mind, Sophia realized, this story had left a mark that would never completely disappear. One evening Sophia sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the sunset. The setting sun colored the sky with gold and pink hues, giving the whole world an illusory sense of warmth and tranquility. She thought about all the events that had happened over the past month. The strange ring, Maria's house, their joint search for the truth. She suddenly felt eerie and strange that it was all over. That moment her phone rang. Sophia flinched, but when she saw Anya's name on the screen, she exhaled a sigh of relief and answered it. "Hi Anya. Hey. I wanted to know how you were. Is everything okay?" In the voice of her friend could be heard a slight concern. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just sitting at home and resting." Anya laughed. "You miss the adventure already, don't you? Admit it." Sophia grinned. "Honestly, well, all I need now is peace of mind." And rightly so. Anya agreed. "By the way, do you want to meet tomorrow? We could go to a movie or a cafe." "That's a great idea. Let's meet after work," said Sophia, feeling that she really needed to distract herself and finally put this story behind her. The next day Sophia went to meet Anya. The weather was surprisingly nice. Warm sunshine and a light breeze made it feel serene. They met outside a small cafe with wooden tables on the street. Anya was already sitting at one of them and waved when she saw Sophia. "Hey, finally, you have no idea how tired I am of being a slacker by myself," Anya said with a smile. Sophia laughed and sat down across from her. "That's it, I'm back to normal," she announced with a slight chuckle. "No more mystery houses, rituals, or mystical entities. Just coffee and cakes." Anya winked. "Way to go." A few hours flew by unnoticed over conversation and laughter. They recalled funny moments from their childhood, dreamed about the future and shared plans. At some point Anya looked thoughtfully at Sophia. I keep thinking about Maria. She didn't have anyone to help her then. Maybe that's why she waited so long for someone to bring her peace back." Sophia nodded and answered, looking into her cup. "Guess so. I sometimes wonder, what would have happened to us if I had just walked past the ring back then?" Anya shrugged. "We would never have known the whole story. And maybe someone else would have been a part of it." Sophia looked up at the sky thoughtfully. "I guess we did the right thing after all. I feel like Maria has finally found peace." Anya smiled. "Yes. And now I hope you two can find peace and start living without that feeling of anxiety." Sophia smiled back and, feeling warm at heart, said, "Thank you, Anya. I couldn't have done it without you." Anya lightly clapped her friend on the arm. "Oh, come on. We've both been through this together. Now the important thing is to put it all behind us and move on." Sophia woke up the next day with a light heart. She no longer felt a heaviness in her chest or looked warily at her reflection. For the first time in a long time she truly felt free. She walked to the window, opened it, and breathed in the fresh morning air. The sun's rays slid softly across her face. A new chapter, she whispered to herself and smiled. Her life was really starting to get back on track. She was back to doing work, going out with friends, traveling around the city, and starting to plan vacations. But even still, sometimes she caught herself thinking that one small detail had changed her entire existence. Just a ring left by someone on an old doorstep opened the door for her to a world where fear and hope were woven into one story. Few months passed. Sophia and Anya met again in the same cafe where they always sat at their favorite table. Conversations were now ordinary and without mystical topics. New movies, weekend plans, work. But when Sophia was about to leave, she saw an elderly woman with a silver medallion around her neck walking slowly down the street. The woman held her gaze and smiled slightly, then disappeared around a corner. Sophia froze for a moment, her heart racing. But then she took a deep breath and said to herself, "It's just a coincidence. It's all behind us." She turned around and headed home, letting the rays of the setting sun warm her shoulders. The evening was warm and calm. Sophia knew that life had given her another chance to live without fear, but with the wisdom of the experiences she had had. And she firmly resolved never again to ignore the inner voice that whispered the truth to her, even when it seemed like everything was just a terrible dream. And even though this story was left far behind, but one day at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight touched her windows, Sophia woke up with a smile and realized, now her world belonged only to her again. Thank you for listening to the end of this story. It was challenging, full of mysticism, mystery, and unexpected twists and turns. I hope it made you think about how even the smallest discovery can change our lives. If you liked it, support the channel. Put a like and subscribe to not miss new stories. In the comments, be sure to share your opinion. What would you do if you were Sophia? What would you do when faced with something so unusual? And, of course, I apologize for any possible mistakes. The language is not my mother tongue, but I keep learning and trying to get better. The story is voiced with the help of artificial intelligence, and your support motivates me to improve. Thank you for your attention and see you in new stories.